The legendary trial we didn't know about. They stayed silent, claiming they didn't know. But history remembers. This film was directed by Stanley Kramer and written by Abby Mann. Mann adapted the screenplay from the 1959 TV play Playhouse 90, Judgment at Nuremberg, condensing the 16 defendants from the actual 1947 trial into just 4 characters. The setting was also changed to 1948 to align with the beginning of the Cold War. The movie's runtime is 2 hours and 59 minutes. The film features some of the greatest stars in both German and Hollywood cinema, with actors of all sizes and roles voluntarily appearing to both give meaning to the historical trial and showcase some of their finest performances. The Nuremberg Trials were a historic event led by the Allied powers after their victory in World War II, where they held individual German leaders accountable for crimes against humanity committed under the Nazi regime. After Germany's defeat, the Allies put major war criminals on trial. In the film, the German judges who had made wartime decisions appear as defendants. American Judge Haywood stays in a grand mansion once occupied by a high-ranking German military couple, where he meets the former lady of the house. Through her, whose husband was killed by an American after the war because he was part of the German army, he learns that German officers were forced to prioritize loyalty to their country over humanity. Throughout the trial, defendant Ernst Janning, who remained silent, later confesses that he was the most evil person, for he not only knew about the corruption and wrongdoings of his colleagues, but he also stayed silent. After much reflection on the special circumstances of the war and the inhumane decisions of the German judges, Haywood decides to sentence Janning to life imprisonment instead of the death penalty. The core of the film lies in the intense courtroom arguments between Judge Spencer Tracy, prosecutor Richard Widmark, lawyer Maximilian Schell, and defendant Burt Lancaster's deeply moving performance. Prosecutor Widmark accuses the Nazi-era judges of their crimes, while lawyer Schell defends former Judge Janning. Unlike typical courtroom dramas, the prosecutor remains calm while the defense attorney aggressively cross-examines the witnesses. The defense attorney tries to corner the witnesses, using the logic that what they did during the Nazi regime was justified as patriotism. Meanwhile, the other defendants, except Janning, deny knowing about the Jewish extermination. However, the defense that "I didn't know" is not acceptable in history. The fact that people in positions of power didn't bother to know was a bigger crime. The film portrays a far more optimistic scenario than history, likely because the director wanted to send an ethical message that this is how history should have unfolded. Janning's confession of conscience is, in reality, something that almost never happened, but the director presents it as a hopeful ideal. While Janning acknowledges his guilt and feels remorse, in reality, few high-ranking legal officers ever publicly repented. In the film, Judge Haywood reads a book Janning wrote in an effort to understand the situation, ultimately delivering a firm and just verdict. In contrast, most judges at the time either stayed silent or collaborated and were later pardoned or returned to the legal profession after the war. The logic used by defendant's lawyer Hans Rolf is partly drawn from legal theories proposed by law scholars in the early Nazi years, with the remainder being the common defense used by war criminals in post-war trials. "I was just following orders, and if I hadn't, I would have been punished," was a classic excuse used to avoid responsibility. The film centers around the concept of responsibility. From the beginning, Rolf asks, "What is Janning's responsibility?" This question contrasts with state-driven ideas of punishment, shifting the responsibility from the law to personal morality. The film raises a larger question about the responsibility of the entire German population, not just the judges on trial. Early on, legal scholar Dr. Karl Wick testifies that since 1933, the German judiciary had prioritized the nation's interests above all else, making acts against the state the highest priority. Appeals were virtually non-existent, and the concept of race was introduced into the law for the first time. When asked if the judges opposed such laws, most either resigned or were forced to resign, and the rest adapted. He reveals that by 1935, he had resigned himself and that death sentences increased drastically during this period, with Jews, politically dissident figures, and even just Polish people being executed. In cross-examination, Rolf emphasizes the socio-economic context of Nazi Germany and argues that the regime solved some issues, using other countries' legal cases to justify their actions. Nevertheless, Wick clarifies that political castration is a problem. Wick himself had taken an oath of loyalty to the regime at the beginning, but resigned when the regime crossed certain boundaries. In contrast, many adapted and collaborated with the regime. One of the most shocking scenes in the film is when Holocaust footage is shown in court. As the video plays, the camera zooms in on the defendants' faces, showing their shocked reactions. Some of them say, "I didn't know it was like that," and ask a concentration camp official how such things could happen. The official calmly explains, and his calmness adds to the shock. This scene transcends legal responsibility and demonstrates how any human being cannot remain silent in the face of such atrocities. This leads to Janning's confession. The dialogue between the Hauptstadt couple, where Judge Haywood and Mrs. Bertolt stay, is also striking. Mrs. Bertolt indignantly asks, "Do you think we knew about it?" And the Hauptstadt couple claims, "Hitler did good things, and we didn't know about what happened to the Jews." This repeated defense of "we didn't know, we couldn't help it" is a recurring theme. The film is masterfully structured so that both sides, American and German, present their arguments compellingly. The film even mentions mistakes made by Russia and Churchill, who not only failed to stop Hitler but even praised him. The German side argues that only a few knew about the Holocaust and that the famous 4 judges, along with the general population, were unaware of the crimes. However, this defense collapses as the brutal truth about eugenics is revealed. As Hannah Arendt's insight into the banality of evil suggests, the film ends with a powerful statement on the barbarity demonstrated by the best minds of the time. Although this is a story from long ago in Germany, the words and attitudes depicted in the film still feel eerily familiar today. Those who pass judgment, those who obey orders, those who assign responsibility, and those who avoid it, all must be aware of where they stand between the law and responsibility. If you found this video helpful, please like and subscribe.